Hey guys, and welcome to the first in the series of videos on Chapter 20, where we'll be discussing medieval Europe. So for the first one, we're going to be getting into regional states with this video, and we'll start off talking about the Holy Roman Empire, which was, both kind of conversely a successful centralized state and a very unsuccessful decentralized state as well. So the Holy Roman Empire was an attempt at Roman centralization. Europe wanted to reclaim that centralized imperial state of Rome. The closest they came was back in Charlemagne's time, because remember, this isn't the first Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor back during his reign by the Pope for helping him out, but his empire fell apart shortly after his death. So this new Holy Roman Empire, which is formed predominantly out of Germany and a little bit out of, what today would be Austria, the Czech Republic, and northern Italy. This was formed by German princes in the late 10th century, notably Otto I. Otto was given the title of the Holy Roman Emperor in 962 as a reward for helping the Pope, similar to what happened with Charlemagne. But conflict soon erupted between later emperors and the popes, and this conflict really prevented the emperors from exerting strong authority. Much of this conflict was centered on the issue of lay investiture. Emperors were, even though they're very, very powerful, they are still technically lay people because they're not clergy. They were appointing church officials within the empire. Pope Gregory VII ended this lay investiture. He says, I'm the only one that has the authority to appoint bishops or priests or anything like that. Emperors wanted to appoint these guys so that they would be loyal to them. It was almost a form of feudalism, of making them their vassals. The Pope says, I don't care if you're the emperor, I'm the Pope, I'm the highest on the food chain when it comes to Christianity, that's my job. This eventually led to some very serious direct conflicts between popes and emperors, most notably between Gregory and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, where you see this artistic depiction of Henry kind of going as a beggar back to the Pope, begging for forgiveness after Gregory excommunicated him. Remember, excommunication, kicking him out of the church, that was a very powerful tool that the Pope had in his arsenal. Eventually, he was given his title back, but in this case, the Pope definitely asserted his control and dominance in the situation. Now, the Holy Roman Empire is one of those somewhat confusing things to learn about throughout European history because it lasted a long time, but as famously put by the 18th century French writer Voltaire, it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. It really was an empire only in name. You look at it here, all of these different states. The regional princes held most of the local authority. That was because the emperors always had their attention or their power kind of strained over a number of different areas, whether it was in direct conflict with the popes or whether it was because they were concentrating so much on unsuccessfully conquering down into Italy that it left northern Europe basically unattended, and so the regional princes were able to do whatever they wanted. So the Holy Roman Empire, even though it would last into the 17 and 1800s, it was never a strong centralized state the way that the old Roman Empire was. So it was always a little bit of a misnomer calling it the Holy Roman Empire. Now on to more well-known states. We've got the two kind of classic examples of France and England. England and France saw the greatest amount of centralized nation development in Western Europe. It's not a coincidence that they would eventually develop into two of the more powerful nations in the early modern era. So first, the growth of French royal power. The earliest French kings were really minor feudal lords. You look at this map, even though I know it's not in English, you look at Domaine Royale. Okay, you can tell that these are your royal holdings here. And you can see that they're basically just centered around Paris and Orleans. The rest of them, these duchies, they were ruled by dukes. And though they were technically vassals to the kings, they in many ways had more power than the kings themselves. But eventually their power did start to expand in 987 when this guy, Hugh Capet, takes the throne. Okay, let me erase this part. All right, and Hugh and later on Capetian kings, they would slowly expand French royal power through relationships with vassals and their kind of and these local lords, and they would centralize control by the 14th century. See, by 1360, how much is expanded? Still not all of it. If you're looking at the modern day borders of France, it's significantly less, but it's a lot more than basically just two small, feudal states that they held back in the late 10th century. One area in particular to look at here is this area of Normandy, okay, because that's going to become very important with Norman England. English royal power, they really began to centralize under Norman control. The Normans were French, as you can see here in the region of Normandy, and they were descendants from Vikings who always remained somewhat autonomous from the French kings. It was technically a duchy of the French kings, so the Duke here in Normandy was technically a vassal, but they always kind of did their own thing. And a perfect example of that is a Duke of Normandy in the mid-11th century called William the Conqueror. All right, William the Conqueror was French, but he claimed the throne of England through his mother's side. The King of England died without an heir, so William decides, well, I'll take it. And he leads a massive invasion across the English Channel into England and takes the throne. Now, aside from centralizing power in England, he also made French the official language of the government and the aristocracy. But you see the extent of Norman control. They had conquered pretty much the entire nation of what today is England. Not so much into Scotland and Wales. They remain somewhat independently Celtic. But you have a very interesting relationship here between, so the King of England is still technically a Duke of Normandy. But Norman conquest of England, that starts a very, very important era of both centralized control, but also French authority within England. There's William. Should have put that up earlier. Okay, one other area is Italy and Iberia. When we're talking about Iberia, we're talking about the Iberian Peninsula, which today are the countries of Spain and Portugal. But first, the Italian city-states. Italy was not reunified into a single state post-Rome. It actually wouldn't remain, it would remain a series of disunified city-states up until the mid-1800s when it was finally united into a single nation. These were politically independent city-states, especially in northern Italy. You have smaller kingdoms like the Kingdom of Sicily and the Kingdom of Naples down here on the bottom of the boot. But up around here, where you have your wealthier, more cosmopolitan areas, you have larger urban centers, largely due to trade, like Genoa, Venice, Florence, and so forth. These were all independent city-states that exerted control over local areas, similar to what we saw in ancient Greece. And these became very, very wealthy due to Mediterranean trade. In addition to these secular states, you also have the papal states here. Okay, these kind of purple. Apologize for not getting a map that was in English. I'm not sure what's going on with the pen here, why it won't go the whole way. Well, in any event, okay, the purple areas are the papal states. This was ruled by the Pope as an independent kingdom. The popes remained very influential in political matters throughout Europe, not only in Italy, but obviously in the Holy Roman Empire, and even in France and Spain and so forth. All right, speaking of Spain, you have both Christian and Muslim states kind of vying for control on the Iberian Peninsula. Here you see kind of a progress from 1035 till 1225. In the, by the late 10th, early 11th century, most of the peninsula you see in green, this was Muslim controlled. Okay, so basically the only areas that were Christian kingdoms were up here in the north, Aragon, Leon, Castile, and so forth. But the green area, this was all under Muslim dominance. Starting in about the year 1100, these Christian kingdoms really start to push southward and back for control. And you see by 1145, they've conquered almost, they've taken control of almost half of it. And then by 1250, the only area that's under Muslim control is this small area here of Granada. Right. This is kind of long period, and this would continue over another 200 years of reclaiming the Iberian Peninsula is known as a Reconquista. Right, the Reconquest. This was completed in 1492 by the joint monarchy of Ferdinand and Isabella when they drove the last Muslim forces from Granada. Okay, and Spain from that point forward would be a Catholic kingdom. All right, so that is a bit about the regional states that we see in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. And for the next video, we'll be talking about medieval economy and society.